trade had proved to be so lucrative. So there was no beaver pond. Therefore, there would be no backed up water. There might have been some water flowing through this area, but nothing like what you can see in this picture. And underneath that water was peat. And peat was a very valuable fertilizer to the farmers in Amos Parmenter's day. So if I can have the next slide, please, I'll show you how they managed to get this peat. They built this stone wall. You can see it curving around. It's now covered over pretty much by beaver dam, but underneath is this rock wall that confined the water and guided it toward a ravine. And in the ravine, the next slide please, they built this water gate. That's not a dam, where water would flow over, but a water gate with a hole in the bottom. And the idea was that they would close that gate, let the water back up into the peat land to create more peat for themselves. Then in the fall of the year, they would open the gate, drain down the water, and after the ground froze in the winter, they would take their oxen and their plows out there and plow up the peat to fertilize their gardens. And I have to assume that Amos Parmenter was responsible or contributed his energy and his ox power to building that water gate and probably going there regularly to harvest peat. And the brook that you see flowing out of the water gate is Parmenter Brook. Okay, let's see. Let's look at the next slide. Ah, yes. Here is George Parmenter, Amos Parmenter's son, his seventh son. And I want to conclude this part of the program by reading the last section of the book, which begins with a reference to Amos Parmenter. I'm going to move over where the light's better. It begins with a quote from my great aunt Evie, my grandfather's older sister. And she writes, "Grandsir met me at the depot as usual. As I looked from the car window, I saw him standing on the platform at the station, waiting. What a fine-looking old gentleman he was. Tall and well-built, beautiful, silvery white hair, and keen black eyes. He was always happy, and it was a rest to look at his pleasant face." That's the end of the quote. Evie Butterfield, my grandfather's older sister, is describing her grandfather, George Parmenter, as she remembered him on an occasion some 5 months before the old man died in 1890. "It was a rest," she said. Nice phrase, that. I take it to mean a combination of quiet comfort and peaceful encouragement. Evie's grandsir was known for miles around for the gift of healing that his Scots-Irish Presbyterian acquaintances attributed to him as a seventh son doctor. From at least the 16th century, some people of Celtic descent held to the notion that a seventh-born son with no intervening sisters could cure various illnesses by the application of a talisman. And my grandmother told me, she knew George, told me that George placed a small pendant around a patient's neck. For Evie, apparently, looking on the old man's bearded face alone was curative. Next slide. It was a rest. That's all right, it's a white screen. I have walked to many places on and around the old Parmenter place where Evie's phrase applies. Parmenter Brook flows over moss-carpeted granite tiers without a sound. That's a rest. A section of stone wall climbs up a hill, catching the sun in its many angled facets. That's a rest. The old road, needle-carpeted, stretches out between its parallel granite bounds in a summer rain. That's a rest. A lichen-covered boulder, warmed in the sun, gives off a subtly metallic aroma. That's a rest. My blue tent, light dappled and viewed through an avenue of white pines. That's a rest. I've studied the structural complexity of old fields' ecological succession. I've tried to figure out the logic of stone wall construction and placement. I've been drawn to the artifacts of an agrarian culture and to the enduring evidence of a settlement's once flourishing businesses. I visited gravestones and monuments erected in memory of. In short, I've gone back to former times and found it a rest. I've also visited new homes in erstwhile hayfields and beside old mill ponds. I've seen how Parmenter Brook has been came to accommodate new roads. I've measured big pines ready for harvesting, standing tall above stumps dating from previous harvests. I've watched a young woman plant ornamental grasses and perennials, beautifying an ancient stone wall. Next slide. In the quiet of a former mowing, I've looked around me at the baffling array of forbs, shrubs, and saplings springing up where once a farmer cultivated only a few chosen grains. Everywhere there are signs of growth, diversity, and emergence, and that's a rest. Thank you.
Would you entertain questions?
I certainly will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you repeat where that quote from Aunt Evie was from? You quoted Evie?
Say it again.
The quote from Evie. Where'd you get it?
A quote from, oh, Evie?
Yeah.
Yes, Evie kept a journal, and it was shipped long after she died. It was shipped to Barbara Carl,
Yep.
who then shared it with the rest of the family.
Right.
And I
Okay.
have excerpts from that journal.
Oh.
Arthur.
I don't have a question, I have a comment.
Good, good, good.
And that is to the group here, if you don't already recognize the incredible mistake you'll make by possibly walking out of here without a copy of that book. I'm probably one of the few people here who had the opportunity to have already read the book. And I can assure you, it's absolutely, to use a wonderful phrase that I have just created for this purpose, it's a page turner.
Thank you, Arthur. Are there other questions or comments? Yes.
What's your favorite memory in those 20 years you spent on the farm?
Oh, undoubtedly raising animals. Every time a calf was born, it was like a new day, you know. I loved that part of farming. Yeah. And I raised a lot of animals myself, including a calf. One night a calf was born to one of my father's heifers, and I don't know what was wrong with it, but he concluded that it probably wasn't going to live through the night. And I said, well, if I can bring it through the night, can I have it? And he agreed, thinking that it was going to die and he would be off the hook. Well, I mixed up some sugar and some milk and a little whiskey. And I dosed that little calf every few hours all night long, and the calf survived that night and all the nights thereafter. It finally grew to be a very good milk cow, which my father was willing to buy from me. And I said, I don't want money. What I want is a horse. I was like 14 years old, maybe at the time. So he went to Fred Proctor. I don't know if any of you know the name Fred Proctor, but he was a horse dealer in town. And found a Morgan mare that Fred was willing to part with for the same value as the cow. So my father bought the horse outright and gave it to me in exchange for the cow. So I rode all over the back roads of Antrim for many years, horseback.
What was the name of the horse?
Queenie.
I remember Queenie. I rode on Queenie's back when you were haying.
Yes.
She'd go up and down the driveway with that great big thing and the rope and the,
Yeah, sure.
before they had a tractor.
Charles, would you comment on your theatrical exploits and those of your family?
Well,
There's a story about you in the middle of the night with a wheelbarrow.
I don't know if this group would appreciate the fact that there was a group known as the Antrim Players. There still is a group known as the Antrim Players, but they're not crazy. The Antrim Players that I knew were crazy. And they had all kinds of weird parties. And one of them happened to come on, if not Halloween night, very close to Halloween. And this is a non-drinking crowd, but they acted as if they were sloshed to the gills. And they decided that there was a buried treasure down near the Monadnock paper mill. And so they wanted me and whoever else was at this particular meeting, after the meeting was over, to go down and see if we could find this buried treasure. I was the organist at Baptist Church in those days, and I couldn't see myself spending the night going out looking for buried treasure when I had to be at the organ in the morning. But I went. And so you have to picture me wheeling a wheelbarrow, because we assumed this was going to be a very heavy treasure when we found it. The rest of the Antrim Players following behind. And we went down there, and I don't know, we dug around, just fooled around, I think, until finally somebody said it was time to go home. But all the time I kept saying, I can't stay here, I've got to go home, I've got to get ready for church, I can't stay here. But I did stay there for the duration of the insanity. Enough?
That's...
Well, thank you all very much for coming. I know Joyce has some wonderful refreshments for us, and I think there's also lemonade. And I will be happy to sign books if you decide you want one. And as long as Chuck is here before he has to run off to Wyoming, he will sign them too. What time is it? Oh, it's not even 4 o'clock. We're doing it very well.
No, I want to get some, but I didn't know what sometimes he gives them to him. So, I don't mind getting him.